In the south, when the leaves begin to change and the first sniff of cool weather is in the air, our thoughts turn to deer season. The white-tailed deer is the big game of choice in the deep south. Once hunted to near extinction, modern game management policies have allowed the herds to expand to unprecedented levels. In fact, they have become quite a nuisance, regularly consuming suburban gardens and causing auto accidents along our highways. These cunning creatures seem to have developed an innate sense about where they are safe from the hunter's rifle. It is almost as if they had perused the latest game regulations just before opening day. Of course, these canny suburban dwellers are off limits for obvious reasons. Most modern-day deer slayers travel to the remote areas to pursue these elusive creatures, and the deer camp has become home away from home for many modern Southerners during the season. Now, don't let the word remote fool you, for while these areas are indeed remote from our modern urbanized world, this was not always the case. For a century and a half ago, much of the land was under cultivation. Farms and little villages dotted the landscape. In fact, it is not unusual at all to come across an old house site or a long untended graveyard as you walk the forest trail with a rifle in your hand. Life is old here, and in life there is energy, and often that energy lingers long after death. This story comes to me from a man who was a member of one of these remote camps. Let's just call him Robert. The camp was a club of sorts, as are many of these camps. He and a group of friends co-owned a piece of land far off from the modern beaten track. There they had built a nice communal cabin to stay in during the season. Most of the club members were middle-aged working men with jobs and families that kept them busy during the off-season. But one member was a man of very advanced age. Let's just call him Old Joe. Joe was one of those rare individuals who retained vigor and sharpness of mind well past the point in life when it has fled from most men. Blessed, or perhaps cursed, for Old Joe had outlived most of his contemporaries. His children and even his grandchildren had grown up and moved far away. His beloved wife of over 50 years had even left him behind when she traveled to that unknown country to which we must all journey one day. So the members of the deer camp became Joe's new family, and it was not such a big leap. For many of the younger members had known Old Joe most of their lives. He taught some of them how to hunt and was still instructing their own children. With nothing but memories in town, Joe sold his house and moved to the deer camp full time, became its caretaker. Driving the camp's old tractor, he cleared the trails and planted the feed plots and grew and tended a large garden. He enjoyed the company of his younger friends and families in the hunting season. But when the season closed and the younger men and children went home, he enjoyed the solitude, for he felt more at home among the ancient oaks and the forgotten tombstones than he did on the city streets. Members of the camp would take turns checking on him and bringing him what little he needed from town. Each weekend a different man would make the long drive out, spend a few hours in pleasant conversation, and then head home loaded down with fresh vegetables and many fond memories. In the fall, when the leaves began to fall, the camp would be ready for the first hunt. But inevitably the day came when one of the members drove out and found old Joe still in bed, having passed peacefully in his sleep. The funeral was a sad event. Joe's far-flung family were all there, as was his deer camp family, and he was laid to rest beside his wife in the city cemetery. But all present could not help but wonder if he would not have preferred to be interred at the deer camp where he had spent so many happy days. Next fall, as the heat finally broke, the surviving members of the deer camp knew that without old Joe's loving attention, the camp would need much work to be ready for the year's hunt. Robert volunteered to go out early and recon the camp so the members would know what labors would be required. Robert's truck rolled to a stop in front of the cabin just before dark, and he tramped through the tall, unkempt grass and unlocked the front door. The cabin's air was still and somewhat stuffy, but otherwise it looked much as it had when Joe was in residence. His plan was to turn in early and be up before first light for an early start. Robert rose before the sun the next morning and began making a pot of coffee in the old-fashioned stove-top coffee pot. Joe had been quite the coffee connoisseur. Even though the cabin had electricity supplied by a small generator, Joe had refused to use an electric coffee maker. When the coffee was done, he stepped out on the back porch with a steaming cup in his hand. In the gray light of the first pre-dawn, he looked out towards the overgrown garden plot, and there saw a man stooped over among the weeds. "Who's there?" barked Robert, and the figure slowly rose and turned toward him. "My God, Joe, is that you?" Silently the figure began to move in his direction. As it did, it faded like a morning mist. As the sky lightened, Robert saw again only the overgrown garden plot. Robert went about his day as planned. The early morning meeting, though, never left his mind. He was not frightened or even terribly alarmed, for old Joe had been a close friend. As the day progressed, a sense of peace settled over him. To think that old Joe's spirit still washed over the camp. For after all, old Joe's body was buried in town, but his heart was at the deer camp.